Chapter 34. The Great Salt Lake. FH was happy to have VIII Garden again. Even broken and in need of power and repairs, the students and staff were welcomed. They had even kept the improvised walkway up to the second-floor balcony. Nita pulled into dock as Sue made her way out to negotiate payment for services and parts. Quistis was going with her to serve as a diplomatic arm to Mayor Dobe and his wife Flo. She was the calmest of them, and the leaders of town were trying. Zell was intentionally staying in to keep away for just that reason. He didn't want to go back down to that judgmental town. Selfie, on the other hand, was excited to go see the mechanics who had designed the stage of her dreams again. Irvine, of course, stayed with her. No one bothered to check in with Squall. They all knew where he was. Fresh from a shower, changed and his inventory in his jacket, Squall stepped into the infirmary to see Drive Katawaki packing her medical bag.
"Oh, Squall, there you are. You're late today, dear." "Yeah, I took a shower before coming,"
he said, pausing before her.
"Going somewhere?" "Yes. I have to go upstairs and give Edia a physical. She's finally agreed and I want to do it before she changes her mind. I was waiting for you to show up though. Will you watch the infirmary for me until I get back?"
"Of course," Squall nodded.
"Thanks, dear."
The doctor closed the bag and lifted it over her shoulder. She walked close and patted his cheek.
"You're a good boy. You should take a vacation." "When I'm finished with this, I will,"
he promised, feeling like he wanted one himself. He had never felt so old in his life, and he wasn't even 20 yet. Smiling at him, Drive Katawaki continued out. Squall didn't watch her go as he walked into Renoa's room again. She hadn't moved. Of course she hadn't. But he was going to get her moving again. And he wasn't waiting until Elone came here.
"Let's go, Renoa,"
he said softly, reaching for her. Cupping her head gently in hand, he lifted her up. He took her legs and swung them over the bed, maneuvering her into a sitting position. Holding onto her so she wouldn't fall back, Squall turned and pulled her arms around his neck. Ordering Shiva to turn off the cold so Renoa wouldn't freeze, Squall reached back and took her hips in hand. He scooted her close to his back, cupping her thighs. Then he stood, leaning forward slightly so she was laying against him, her chin on his shoulder. "Let's go meet Elone," he said to her silently. "Elone will bring us together again." There was no one to stop him as he made his way to the second floor. All the students were eager to get out and into FH, so the garden was cleared out. The elevator was his alone. The classrooms were even more deserted. The garden was almost eerily quiet as he moved to the second-floor balcony. Even the docking station was empty as all the technicians had made their way inside to get a better look at the damage. "I'm sorry, everyone. I can't go on like this." A few people spotted him in town, but none of them questioned him. He worked his way to the closed train station and jumped from the platform down onto the tracks. West would take him into Timber. East would lead to the edge of the Star continent.
"It's a bit far,"
Squall said to Renoa, adjusting her weight. She wasn't heavy. It was actually pretty comfortable to hold her like this. The only thing that would be better was if she was conscious and able to lock her legs around him, tighten her arms and whisper into his ear as she laughed in delight at the way he carried her. When she was awake, he would do this again, properly. He would do everything he had stupidly resisted before. He wouldn't let her leave him again. With those thoughts in mind, he kept walking. And walking. And waking. It was far. Squall didn't think it was going to be this far. Though the garden had docked before noon, it was nearing sunset and Squall was still walking. What was he even doing? Leaving everything behind? Not telling anyone? What was he really hoping to accomplish here? Go to Estar. Find Elone. Talk to Elone. A simple, 3-step strategy. He could do that. It was a plan. He liked a plan. Something that he could do. An action he could take. Of course, there was no guarantee that everything would be resolved if he talked to Elone. Even so, he had to try. He had to go. He couldn't just leave Rinoa like this. Never see her smile again. Never hear her melodic voice. He had to do something for her. He sure had changed. At some point down the tracks, Squall had to take a break. Gently setting Rinoa against a lamppost, he sat next to her with his feet dangling off the end of the bridge. The ocean stretched out seemingly infinitely in all directions. He couldn't see FH anymore, nor could he see the continent yet. It almost felt like he was suspended in the middle. In more ways than one. Looking out over the sparkling water, into the bright sunset, he somehow didn't feel very alone. Even if she was unconscious, Rinoa was there. It felt nice for her to be there. He was going to go bring her back. What was everyone else doing? They were probably laughing at him. Or maybe they were angry for the way he abandoned the garden. He couldn't really blame them either way.
What do you think?
He asked the silent Rinoa as though she were privy to his thoughts.
To tell you the truth, I worry too much about what others think of me. I hate that side of me. That's why I didn't want anyone to get to know me. I wanted to hide that part of myself. That weakness. I hate it. Squall is an unfriendly, introverted guy. It made it easy for me when people perceived me that way.
Grinning, he looked at the still Rinoa.
That's a secret between you and me. Got that?
Her hair rustled in the breeze. His smile slipping slightly, Squall stood and returned to her side. That was enough rest. He had to keep going.
Rinoa.
Reaching out, he stroked her hair from her face.
Come on. We're losing daylight.
It was a little awkward getting her back onto his back without the help of her elevation on a bed. But he managed it after a moment and returned to his walk across the tracks. Even as the sky darkened, he kept walking. Night fell and stars lit up the sky, he kept walking. Only when his legs couldn't travel any further, and he was at danger of dropping Rinoa or himself, did he finally stop. The moon was high in the sky overhead when he stopped at another lamppost. He set Rinoa down gently before sitting down next to her. Reaching out, he took her by the shoulders and pulled her in close, keeping her otherwise cold body warm with his own. Shiva wasn't complaining at the relative warmth. It was the first time Squall fell asleep with someone in his arms. If she had been awake, the moment might have been perfect. Squall. It wasn't until the next morning that Squall finally reached the end of the tracks. Tired and a bit sore from an uncomfortable night, he was still undeterred. His eyes were on the ground, focusing on his footsteps, so he didn't immediately notice that he wasn't alone. Until he heard a soft, familiar laugh.
Squall, you're late,
Quistis greeted him, crossing her arms over her stomach.
We've been waiting all morning for you to catch up.
Squall froze, looking up in confusion to see not only Quistis but Zell as well. He was grinning, hand to his hip cocked out to the side. He came forward, smiling peacefully. As if they had planned this all along. He leaned in close to where Rinoa's head was resting against Squall's shoulder.
Is the princess still asleep?
Quistis grinned.
She might wake up with a kiss from the prince.
Trying to hide his blush, Squall jerked back from them.
Is that why you came all the way out here? To tell me that? How did you even get here? We took a boat from FH,
Zell smiled.
You're going to SDR, right?
Quistis asked.
We're coming, too. We're Edia's escort,
Zell pounded his chest proudly. He stood back and pointed. Sitting at an old wooden bench in the old train stop, Edia stood to her feet. She was back in her black gown, mostly because she didn't have anything else to wear in her size. She didn't think it would be professional to leave the garden in Sid's clothing. At least the black gown had been repaired in the garden, so the large hole was gone. And someone had the foresight to cut back the claws on the sleeves, reducing them to wrist cuffs. She made her way over to him, smiling gently.
Evening, dear. I was worried we wouldn't catch up to you. It took a few hours before we even noticed you were missing.
Squall moved over to the bench Edia had been sitting on. Gently, he set Rinoa down onto it, leaning her side against a post, before turning around to face the others.
What business do you have in SDR, matron? I must go see Dr. Odin,
she said formally, crossing her hands in front of herself.
He's number one when it comes to magical goods,
Zell grinned.
And there's no one more knowledgeable about sorceresses than he. Why do you need to see him?
Squall asked. Edia frowned.
Sorceress Ultimecia is still alive. She is able to take control of my body at any time. If that were to happen, I would once again bring terror. I, too, value my well-being. I want to protect myself. Though it would no doubt be strange after a lifetime, if it were possible, I would like to rid myself of the sorceress's power. Dr. Odin may know a way. He may be able to save me.
It was a good plan, Squall nodded along with her. One that would solve at least some of their problems at the moment.
I understand,
he said.
Let's all go to Estar then. Well, we're actually waiting,
Zell said.
For what?
Squall frowned. It took almost another hour for Selphie and Irvine to return. By then, Squall was anxious to get moving again. Edia was doing her best to keep him from leaving despite the others' absence by telling them all stories of when they were young. The half-remembered tales were interesting to hear and highlighted a part of his life Squall would probably never have back. Not that he cared to overmuch. What mattered was right now. Finally, when he was about to order them out anyway, Zell pointed down the dry plains that stretched out beyond the train station.
Yo, they're back. They went ahead to scout,
Quistis told Squall.
Trying to find us a way in. I wanted to just send Selphie because I thought she'd be faster. I knew I was right. But Irvine insisted she needed backup.
The couple were running up on them quickly. Squall frowned. Selphie's face was flushed and she was moving a little strangely. Irvine's grin was wider than normal and Squall didn't think he noticed, but his shirt was on inside out under his coat.
Why did you have to send those two alone?
Squall asked Quistis in an aside. She sighed as they caught up.
How's it goin', Squall?
Selphie greeted, beaming as he moved over to pick Rinoa back up. As he was settling her on his back again, Selphie leaned in.
Is Rinoa still asleep? She's so cute when she's sleeping, don't you think so?
Whatever, Squall grumbled. He was pleased though that everyone kept saying sleep. Like she still might wake up at any moment.
Woo!
Selphie drew back, clasping her hands to her cheeks.
Are you blushing? That's adorable.
Squall turned from her deliberately and looked at Irvine.
So how is it? Can we make it to Estar? He's totally blushing. Someone please tell me they have a camera. Selphie, don't make Squall angry,
Irvine said, his voice very chill and mellow. Life was all good for him and he was happy to spread that joy to others. He looked at Squall calmly.
So, Estar's definitely on this continent, right? It's supposed to be huge. At least that's what I've heard. I don't know why, but we can't seem to find it anywhere. Nothing but cliffs up north,
Selphie shrugged.
And nothing but smooth trails down south,
Irvine grinned salaciously.
More cliffs.
Selphie snapped at him.
Anyway, that just leaves east. It has to be that way, there's nowhere else to go. Thing is, that way leads through the Great Salt Lake. And I don't know much about it, but the sign we found that said keep out in really dark and scary letters was promising. East it is,
Squall said. They weren't seeds because they were afraid of danger.
Right this way, matron,
Quistis said, indicating forward. Squall didn't know if the Great Salt Lake was once a real lake, or if the one who named it thought he was being hilariously ironic. There wasn't a drop of water in sight. However, there was more salt than Squall would honestly have thought possible. The rocks, the path, the cliffs all seemed to be made of nothing but the glittering white crystals. It even coated the multiple, enormous monster bones that had been left out in the sun. Hollow, cold, and old, the monsters were long dead. They made a rather eerie sight though. Mostly because they were so enormous. Selphie frowned at the start of the path. She stood up on her toes, shielding her eyes to get a better look at everything. The sun reflecting off of the salt was doing weird things to her eyes. It almost made things look kind of fuzzy. But as far as the lake extended, she saw only more bones and rock.
Hello. I don't see a city.
Curious, she ran forward. Of course, Irvine was just a step behind her. He had been trailing her like a puppy since they began walking. He was quiet though. Squall wasn't sure if it was a bad or a good thing that he had finally fulfilled his desires.
Looks like we are in for a long trip,
Eddie sighed sadly. If they couldn't even see the city from here, it must be very far inland.
Everything'll be all right,
Zell promised her, grinning.
We'll be by your side all the way.
Eddie laughed gently.
Thank you, Zell. But remember, you must stay alert even in my presence. As long as I can be myself, everything will be fine. But if Ultimisia gets inside me again, you all know what you must do.
Squall's jaw tightened as Quistis and Zell turned away quickly. They didn't want to think about it. their matron once again becoming that wicked woman. Or what they would have to do. Squall didn't have a second phoenix pinion. Selfie's footsteps crunching against the salt warned of her return. She looked between them, frowning with her hands on her hips as she stopped.
What? What? Did I miss something?
She blinked at the tension.
Uh-oh. It's so quiet. The air's getting heavy. Guys? What's wrong? Come on. We're all together again. We're gonna bring back Rinoa. It's like a picnic. With monsters. We're gonna have fun.
Squall took in a breath.
I heard once that if you say bad things, they'll come true. I know it's a silly superstition, but right now I want to believe it. So let's not talk about it anymore.
The others nodded in agreement as they started down towards the lake. Eddie remained at Squall's side and, automatically, the others formed a protective circle around them. Eddie and Rinoa were the helpless ones in this situation, so they were put in a cocoon of bodies. Everyone was talking though. Asking Eddie questions. Discussing plans. Complaining about the garden food, because that was always a favorite topic. But since Squall was in the circle instead of just a part of it, all that conversation flowed around him. He wasn't exactly taking part in it, but he was there listening all the same. It almost felt normal at this point. Comfortable. For all of them. Squall not talking. Everyone else talking around him. Not excluding him. He was still very much part of it even if he rarely directly interacted with them.
This place is creepy,
Selfie complained, rubbing her arms.
Not to mention dry. I think I'm getting flaky skin. Want me to check you?
Irvine asked, smirking.
I'm hosing you two down when we find water,
Quistis told them calmly.
You have no room to judge me.
Selfie pointed at her accusingly.
All right,
Eddie chuckled, holding up her hands.
There's no need to argue about it. Is there nothing else on your mind, Irvine?
Zell asked, irritated.
Who could possibly have room when you consider the vast variety of...
Squall was never more happy to hear an ominous rumbling as he was in that moment. It cut Irvine off from whatever he was about to say. The salt flats around them started shaking. Hands went to weapons as everyone looked around. Except Squall, who couldn't on account of the fact that he was holding Rinoa on his back. His gun blade was still in his inventory because of FH's ban on weapons as he had been walking through. He was already turning to Edia. He was about to tell her to step back and stay with Rinoa somewhere safe when Quistis stepped up. Like she had seen the thought in his head, she stopped him.
Squall, you stay back with Matron. But... look after Rinoa. We can handle this.
Irvine, Selfie, and Zell grinned at her side. The four of them would be more than a match for whatever was coming for them. Squall knew that. Still, somehow it went against the grain for him to stand back and let someone else fight. From the salt canyon just off the path, a large, bony hand erupted. Planting itself into the ground, it was immediately followed by a skeletal monster the size of a house. Partially torn wings on its back shimmering in the sunlight, flickering weakly.
An undead monster,
Squall frowned at the large beast. Bright red antlers, ashen claws, big and ugly and strong.
Let me handle this,
Zell said confidently, striding forward.
Zell,
Selfie frowned.
You'll need more than fire to take on an undead. Oh, I know that. But I ain't gonna use fire. I'm going to use the gift I picked up from Matron. I've just been waiting to use this baby. Gift?
Edia repeated, frowning.
What gift?
Zell smirked. He had been training with both of them. Ifrit said the other one was too damn calm for his liking and they bickered like siblings. However, it didn't bother Zell. If anything, they felt like they were getting along in some strange, aggressive way. Reaching deep into his mind, he grasped hold of the new GF that Sorceress Edia had been holding onto. Holy powers of life and vitality. The breathtaking beauty that made the world turn. Life. Death. And renewal. The glorious wings of the legendary guardian. Zell's eyes glowed white as he touched Alexander's power.
Divine judgment.
The white light, piercing and somehow cooling, seemed to erupt from somewhere beyond the far horizon. Zell brought his hands down, bringing the white light with it. The monster hissed and roared in pain as the healing, pure energy engulfed his body. Old bones cracked and chipped. Wings fluttered madly while it tossed its body in pain.
Quake!
Irvine yelled, throwing out his hand. The ground under the monster started shaking, pitching him up and over. It fell all the way back down the canyon it had just climbed from. Selfie ran to the edge and giggled when she saw it burst into fragments of bones.
What did we tell you, Squall?
Irvine winked, blowing on his finger like the barrel of a gun.
You worry too much. Just watch the princess and let us deal with this.
Squall nodded to him, thankful for the protection. If, for no other reason than he didn't need to abandon Rinoa and leave her helpless off to the side. They continued forward down the path until they reached a tall cliff too steep to climb down. Selfie whistled as she looked out over the enormous lake before them.
They weren't kidding when they called it great, hey? How far do you think it goes?
Zell asked, rubbing his eyes. They felt weird looking out into the landscape for some reason.
Let's just go around,
Squall nodded with his head.
We need to find a place to climb down.
They started walking, looking out into the lake and back to where they came from. Maybe it was the sun beating off of the salt pillars, but it was so hard to stare into the lake. Their eyes were protesting at being forced to do so and it gave them a slight headache. The first time the air fuzzed, Squall didn't think anything about it. The sun could play bad tricks and the white landscape was worse than looking at snow. The third time, Squall finally focused. Because it hadn't been just a mirage of the eyes. It had definitely been fuzz. Like white noise.
Squall.
Quistis turned back when he stopped.
Something wrong?
Squall didn't answer. He stared at the air in confusion. Then, on a lark, he forcefully focused his eyes closer than where they thought they should in order to look at the landscape. And it didn't get blurry when he did so. Almost like what he was looking at wasn't far away at all. The air fuzzed again as Squall reached out. His fingers splayed as he reached out. Moving close to the edge of the cliff, Selfie called out a warning.
Squall, what are you doing?
Zell frowned, moving closer like he was going to pull him back. Squall's fingers smacked against a hard surface. His hand flattened and he blinked. He pushed but the wall was hard and firm. He tapped against the air and it tinked like glass.
What?
Irvine frowned, leaning close. He pulled his Bismarck out and knocked the air harder. It was definitely the sound of glass.
What's going on?
Selfie frowned.
There's something there,
Squall murmured. He ran his hand along the air. He almost wanted to close his eyes to prevent the conflicting stimuli from giving him a headache. What he was looking for couldn't been seen anyway. His gloves suddenly stopped as he detected a small seam in the air. A crack. Perfectly straight, going up at an angle. Then, above his head, it leveled into a straight, perfectly horizontal line. Until his fingers hit another, smaller plate. He pressed it curiously. It went in. A button. The effect couldn't be seen, but Squall felt it. The pattern of what he was touching changed. Like chunks were being carved out in the air, forming footholds. Then, above his head, a doorway opened leading to a tunnel suspended in the air leading to nothing.
A hole in midair.
Edia shook her head. It was only worsening the effect of staring at something that looked far away but wasn't.
That's weird.
Ivan tilted his head.
Is it a tunnel or something? Can you see inside?
Squall touched along the invisible footholds.
This looks like the only way.
Bouncing Rinoa up a bit higher, he released one of her legs to grab the holds. He climbed up with only one arm a bit awkwardly. The others gathered below, ready to catch Rinoa if she fell. Despite the strange climb, he made it to the top. And found himself staring down a dark, metal tunnel leading somewhere.
It's safe,
he yelled out over his shoulder, walking forward slowly. What in Hind's name? He stepped from the tunnel onto a catwalk. To one side was a control panel. In front of the panel, there was a series of hexagonal, glass panels. All lined up in neat rows. Clear and innocuous. Squall turned and looked back towards where he had come from. Beyond the tunnel he could make out hexagonal shapes, all dark. The image on the other side blurring the glass, darkening the strange room where they were standing. He remained there as the others joined him.
What is with this?
Zell frowned, looking around.
Who made this?
Squall looked past the catwalk to another door. There was a small green light over the access panel. Did that mean it was unlocked? He didn't need to press it to find out. The door opened automatically as they approached. He stepped out onto a platform, hexagonal and blue. Held in place by metal arms on opposing sides and set onto a metal track overhead.
What's this?
Edia asked, stepping onto it.
Is it an elevator?
Squall stepped to the edge and, as the last one came through, the door shut and the platform hummed to life. Without any indication from them, it began traveling along the track it was set into. Moving sideways along a long wall of hexagonal panels.
Where are we going?
Selphie frowned, concerned. That platform didn't move fast. It hit a point then started traveling upwards. Again, with no command from them, it stopped. And a small door opened on the opposite wall of the last one.
Commander!
Irvine looked to him. Squall tightened his jaw. He didn't know what he was doing. Where he was. He didn't know if they would even make it to Esthar at this point. But he didn't care.
I'm not turning back now.
He went forward confidently. The others fell in line behind him. They traversed another short tunnel then stepped onto yet another blue, hexagonal platform. Just like the last, it started humming to life as they came aboard. Unlike the last one, the wall of panels suddenly all flickered. Then, like ripples in a pond, all the panels suddenly went clear. Winking off, spreading outward in all directions. Multiple gasps of surprise, awe, and wonder echoed from behind him. Even Squall couldn't stop his jaw from opening. There was no way that was a city. The sheer size of it. Stretching too high into the sky, the buildings scraping the clouds themselves. Blue, purple, yellow, white, and green. As far as his eye could see in either direction. Squall had never felt so small in his life as he did looking at the enormous buildings in a style he had never seen before.
"Will you look at that?"
Irvine gasped.
"Pretty."
Selfie beamed.
"The hell is this?"
Zell drew back, his eyes wide.
"My goodness!"
Quistis breathed in awe. Edia looked to Squall.
"What is going to happen now?"
The platform jerked to life as if answering her questions. It dropped an inch. Then just dropped. Like they were on a ride suddenly fell down. Selfie cried out and Squall had to steady himself as the platform sunk into a long, hollow, clear tube. There was no wind. They were just moving that fast. The platform followed a curve in the pipe, then straightened horizontally. And they were racing along the city. Buildings passed so fast that none of them could catch more than a glimpse. Cars raced by on roads built into the sky of the same clear blue material as the platform. The others were talking, gasping, and turning around him. Even Squall couldn't help but look around, his hands tightening on Rinoa as though to keep her safe. An enormous city to the east. With tech years ahead of the rest of the world. Hidden behind an illusion of glass and light. There was no doubt in his mind where he was. Esthar. He knew, intellectually, how advanced they were. It was a completely different thing actually seeing the proof of it. He felt almost like a Neanderthal in the presence of fire for the first time. The platform exited the tube, slowing as it did so. The tracks led them down to a metal dock. The platform slid into place, locking down. Everyone stayed unmoving, blinking, and looking around. They were almost all too scared to walk forward. Squall swallowed and just plunged ahead.
"Judging from this, I would say they must know we're here,"
he told the others, trying to remain confident.
"It's possible we might encounter some hostility, so stay ARGH."
Squall's legs collapsed and he dropped down onto his knee as the familiar high-pitching shrieking of Elon's power took over his mind. Gritting his teeth, he tried to fight it. He had been waiting for this for days, and now when he didn't want it she took him back. "No. Not now." Irvine collapsed behind him. "This isn't the time, Elon. Please." Selfie hit the deck. Squall tried to pull Rinoa around. He was going down, he could feel it. The most he could do was protect her from hitting the ground. He collapsed onto his side, still holding her in his arms. Her head nestled into his bicep. End of chapter.